Tonight, Senate Democrats have unleashed a massive procedural flood of 30 simultaneous resolutions aimed at halting an unauthorized war in Iran. Meanwhile, across the aisle, Republicans are preparing a nuclear budget maneuver to bypass the ongoing Department of Homeland Security shutdown that has been paralyzing parts of the government since mid-February. It is a high-stakes moment where procedural rules are being used as both a shield and a spear.
30 resolutions hitting the floor at once is more than a protest. It's a deliberate, structural logjam. If you look at how the Senate functions, every single one of those joint resolutions carries a mandatory debate period under the law. It's as if Democrats are trying to physically slow down time on the floor to prevent other business from moving forward.
That is exactly the goal, Reed. It's procedural guerrilla warfare. But before we dive into the details of the flood, we have to address the divorce. That's the atmosphere in the Senate right now, as Republicans move to officially cut Democrats out of the budget process for the border. The bridge between the two parties on Homeland Security hasn't just burned. It's been dismantled.
You're talking about the Reconciliation Gambit. This is the big news from the Congressional Record yesterday. Republican Senator John Thune of South Dakota, the Senate Majority Leader, basically announced that he's done waiting for a bipartisan deal on the Department of Homeland Security. The department has been in a state of partial shutdown since February 14th, and Thune's solution is to use the budget reconciliation process to fund it for the next 3 years.
And for those who aren't procedural nerds like us, reconciliation is the get-out-of-jail-free card for the filibuster. It only requires a simple 51-vote majority to pass. By moving DHS funding into a reconciliation bill, Republicans are effectively stripping Democrats of their 60-vote leverage. Thune was very direct about this shift in strategy. He told the chamber, Democrats have chosen to abdicate their responsibility to fund key parts of the Department of Homeland Security.
The floor transcript shows Thune is framing this as a binary choice between funding law enforcement and what he termed defunding border security. He specifically pointed to the working families tax cut as the temporary reason immigration enforcement is still funded through the end of this current fiscal year. But he's looking at the cliff in September. He argued, we can't rely on Democrats to prioritize the safety of our communities. So, Republicans are going to take up a reconciliation bill to fund border security and immigration enforcement for the next 3 years.
What stands out in the record is the granular reason why the deal fell apart. This wasn't just a vague disagreement over top-line budget numbers. It was about specific conduct for ICE agents. Democratic Senator Richard Durbin of Illinois, the Democratic whip, took to the floor to give a detailed rebuttal to Thune. He wasn't talking about spreadsheets. He was talking about masks and transparency in the field.
The mask issue is a striking visual from the debate. Durbin mentioned that he's been in the Senate for 30 years and he's never seen a standoff quite like this. He argued that ICE agents are operating in ways that local police simply do not. He told the chamber, if your home state is South Dakota, like the Republican leader, or Illinois like myself, our policemen don't wear masks. Our state troopers don't wear masks. Our deputy sheriffs don't wear masks. Why should federal agents be anonymous when interacting with civilians?
Durbin is connecting this to a specific and tragic set of events. He referenced the killing of 2 innocent Americans in Minneapolis during a protest where ICE agents were involved. He noted that the agency initially labeled the deceased as domestic terrorists, but it later turned out one of the victims was a nurse at a local veterans hospital. That is the human weight behind the Democratic demand for reform. They want judicial warrants for home entries and a strict ban on agents wearing masks in civilian interactions.
And that's where the goalposts comment from Thune comes in. He characterized those demands as a political strategy to defund law enforcement by making their jobs impossible. But Durbin's response was focused entirely on the Fourth Amendment. He said, if you don't have a court that says you have legal authority to tear down my front door and come into my home and arrest me, then you shouldn't do it. That is basic American law. He's framing it as a constitutional necessity, not a budget preference.
It's a total breakdown in ideological consensus. Republicans see these tactics as operational necessities for a dangerous job. Democrats see them as a form of constitutional overreach. Durbin pointed out that Democrats offered to separate ICE funding from the rest of DHS 11 different times to keep the rest of the department, like the Coast Guard and TSA, open. Republicans rejected that every time because they want the leverage of the full department's funding to force the immigration issue.
And now, with Senator Lindsey Graham, the Republican from South Carolina, already drafting the budget resolution, the divorce is imminent. If they go the reconciliation route, the reforms Durbin is asking for, those judicial warrants and mask bans, are essentially dead on arrival. They won't be included in a Republican-only bill. It effectively silences the Democratic minority on the specific mechanics of immigration enforcement for the next 3 years.
While the budget war is heating up, the floor of the Senate just got hit by a procedural tidal wave. Democrats introduced 30 joint resolutions in a single day. Most of them are aimed at the conflict in Iran, while the remainder target consumer protection rollbacks. It is a massive attempt to clog the legislative pipes and force specific, uncomfortable votes.
30 is a staggering number. I had to verify the list twice in the record. It's SJ Res 159 through 183. Think of it like this. If the Senate is a highway, Democrats just parked 30 semi-trucks across every single lane. Under the War Powers Act and the Congressional Review Act, these resolutions are privileged. That means they can't just be ignored by the leadership or buried in a committee. They eventually force floor time and mandatory votes.
The Iran resolutions are especially pointed. We're seeing names like Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon, and Senator Cory Booker of New Jersey all putting their names on identical resolutions. The text indicates they are all titled a joint resolution to direct the removal of United States armed forces from hostilities that have not been authorized by Congress. They are challenging the president's authority to maintain a presence in the region without a fresh mandate.
The context here is both human and financial. The record contains a scathing speech from Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen of Maryland. He called the entire military operation Operation Epic Failure. He's connecting the war directly to the wallets of everyday listeners. He used a phrase that I suspect we're going to hear on a loop in the midterms: the Iran war tax. He's trying to make the geopolitical personal.
Van Hollen was very specific about the math behind that phrase. He said the conflict is currently costing the United States about $1 billion every single day. He pointed to a 20% increase in the price of gasoline in the month of March alone. He told the floor, American families are paying every time they fill up the tank, every time they buy groceries, and every time they book a flight. This war is an invisible tax on every household in the country.
He also hit on the sheer confusion of the administration's strategy in the Strait of Hormuz. This was the part of the speech that really felt like a breakdown of executive inconsistency. He pointed out that over the weekend, the president demanded Iran keep the strait open for commerce, then only hours later announced the U.S. would blockade the very same strait. Van Hollen called this strategic whiplash folly and argued it's putting our sailors in an impossible position.
And he didn't stop there. He connected it to Russia as well. He alleged that while the U.S. is blockading the strait, the administration is quietly letting sanctioned Iranian oil reach the market to keep domestic gas prices from skyrocketing further. Even worse, he claimed Russia is being given a hall pass to sell oil, which they then use to provide intelligence to Iran to target U.S. troops in the field. He told the chamber, the administration is financing the very war that it started through these back-channel oil deals.
It's a heavy accusation, and it sets the stage for these 30 upcoming votes. But we shouldn't overlook the other half of that flood. Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts and her colleagues introduced a series of resolutions to stop the Bureau of Consumer Financial Protection from withdrawing key protections. We're talking about rules against invalid nursing home debts, where facilities go after the children of residents for unpaid bills, and rules preventing credit discrimination based on sexual orientation.
By introducing these as individual resolutions instead of one consolidated bill, Democrats are forcing Republicans to go on the record 30 different times. They have to vote specifically on whether or not they support allowing debt collectors to go after nursing home residents, or whether they support withdrawing data security rules for personal banking. It's a strategy designed to create a massive paper trail of votes that can be used in campaign ads later this year. They want every Republican to have to own these rollbacks individually.
And it halts everything else. When you zoom out to the broader legislative landscape, if each of these gets even an hour of debate, the Senate calendar is effectively toast for the next 2 weeks. There's no room for other nominations or bills. It's a way of the minority saying, if you won't talk about the war or consumer rights on our terms, we won't let you talk about anything else at all.
But there is one thing they are talking about, and it's perhaps the most explosive domestic issue on the docket right now: the SAVE Act. Democratic leader Chuck Schumer of New York took to the floor, and he did not hold back. He called the act a cynical subterfuge for a voter suppression law. He is positioning the party for a massive fight over the very mechanics of the next election.
The SAVE Act is the Safeguard American Voter Eligibility Act. On the surface, the pitch is simple. It requires documentary proof of citizenship to register to vote in federal elections. But the floor proceedings show Schumer is framing this as a preemptive strike on the 2026 midterms. He said if Republicans can't win over the voters with their ideas, they just don't get to write American voters out of the system through bureaucratic hurdles.
The technical details here are what really matter for the average person. The act would require documents like a passport or a birth certificate for registration. Schumer pointed to research showing that 21 million Americans don't have those documents readily available. He specifically mentioned the impact on married women. If your name on your birth certificate doesn't match your current government-issued ID because of a name change after marriage, you might be flagged as a non-citizen by the DHS databases this bill would mandate for use.
He brought up a Missouri pilot program that provides a look at the potential fallout. In that program, over half of the people flagged as non-citizens by the database were actually legal, natural-born U.S. citizens. Schumer's argument is that the purge is the intended outcome, not the stated goal of security. He argued the bill purges millions of Americans from voter rolls and effectively kills online and mail-in voter registration by requiring physical documents that can't be easily uploaded.
The political pressure on this is coming from outside the chamber too, and Schumer was quick to point that out. He mentioned that unelected ideologues and figures like Elon Musk and Steve Bannon are the ones driving this legislative push. Musk has been posting that democracy is dead if this doesn't pass, and Bannon has even suggested having ICE agents stationed at polling places. Schumer used those comments to frame the current GOP as being in a state of chaos and dysfunction, led by outside influencers.
It's interesting how he tied it back to the DHS shutdown we discussed earlier. He claimed the reason Republicans won't agree to a clean funding bill for the department is because of Stephen Miller's influence. He said Stephen Miller, an unelected ideologue, is calling the shots, not Congress, not the people's representatives. He's painting a picture where the border, the shutdown, and the voting laws are all part of one single Miller-driven agenda to disrupt the government.
And his conclusion was a total line in the sand. He vowed that Senate Democrats will filibuster the SAVE Act indefinitely. He said they will not allow it to even reach a final vote. So, if you were hoping for a quiet, bipartisan path to the midterms, the record suggests exactly the opposite. We are looking at a total collision course over who gets to vote and how they prove they are allowed to.
You know, despite all this Operation Epic Failure and voter suppression rhetoric on the floor, the actual committee machine of the Senate is still somehow grinding forward in the background. I was looking at the Oversight Calendar for the next 2 weeks, and it is a fascinating mix of the existential and the incredibly mundane. It shows that the work of government continues even during a meltdown.
It really is a study in contrasts. On April 23rd, the Senate is holding a major posture hearing for U.S. Central Command to talk about the war in Iran. But then on the very same day, there's a subcommittee hearing on the preparations for the 2026 FIFA World Cup. It's like a Senate is saying, we might be on the brink of a massive conflict, but we still need to know where the fans are going to park in Kansas City and Seattle.
Exactly. And the Energy Committee is doing a deep dive into something I'm actually very curious about: liquid cooling systems for AI server clusters. It's Senate Bill 3269. A key detail in the record is that these AI systems are consuming water at a rate that is starting to alarm local utilities. While the floor is shouting about Stephen Miller, the Energy Subcommittee is trying to figure out how much water we're going to need to keep the next generation of LLMs from melting the power grid or draining our reservoirs.
It's that classic DC split brain. One half of the brain is fighting over the soul of the Constitution and the fate of the Middle East, and the other half is making sure the IRS 2026 filing season goes smoothly. The record shows upcoming hearings on everything from Second Amendment rights to Great Lakes restoration, and even a session on empowering seniors through financial literacy. They are balancing the fire on the floor with the plumbing in the committees.
I find that oddly reassuring. It means that somewhere in the building, staff and senators are still doing the nuts and bolts work of oversight. Even if the big DHS funding bill is stuck in reconciliation purgatory, they're still asking the Federal Trade Commission how they're protecting consumers from AI-generated scams. It's the two-track reality of Congress: the performative battle and the practical management. They happen at the same time, often in rooms right next to each other.
It's a strange day in the Capitol. The Senate is simultaneously debating a potential world war in Iran and a domestic government shutdown. Yet the Energy Committee has still made sure to find time to discuss the cooling systems for AI servers and the logistics for the 2026 World Cup. It reminds you that even in a crisis, the mundane business of the future must go on. The Senate is a place that can worry about a blockade and a soccer tournament in the same hour.
They really must. I'll be keeping an eye on those liquid cooling bills and the data center water usage. It's the kind of footnote that becomes a headline in 5 years when we realize we're out of water. But for now, the procedural flood continues on the floor. We'll see how many of those 30 resolutions actually make it to a vote.
That's floor notes for today. We've covered the flood, the divorce, and the AI cooling. A typical Tuesday in the world's greatest deliberative body.
Stay informed out there. We'll be back when the next gavel falls to break down what it all means for you.